So today we're going to talk about budgeting. So this is going to take a few iterations because it kind of the whole budgeting thing for us kind of evolved. So I'm going to use this spreadsheet that I kind of showed all my major life financial changes and things that happened. So you're seeing how we're gonna start it on that spreadsheet to just kind of describe to you how we evolved into budgeting. We well, I'm going to explain that in a minute, but basically, we're not crazy budgeters. One of the things that we found through budgeting is it did a couple things for us. One, right? So I was always a big time saver. You've seen my history. If you've watched my history video, if you go back to one of the earlier videos that I did, you'll see that we grew up pretty poor. And so I had to pay for everything. So when I got out of college and lived in Colorado, I don't think I've done that whole path. I'll do a video on that, like where how I've traveled through different areas through my career to end up in Jersey. But I really didn't have much. So when I was a kid, it was, I was paying for everything: insurance, food, not food, clothes, the car, the gas, college, books, everything had, repairs to the car, tires, brakes, I had to pay for everything. That's why I had to work a lot of hours, which is in another video. It's in my history video. So as I got older, it's kind of like I think of it like the depression mentality almost. People who go through a depression when they're old, they'll go to the diner and they'll take the sugar packs and they'll bring the sugar packs home with them. It's just, I mean, and they could be rich, and yet because of those childhood memories and that childhood patterns that kind of hit their brain, even when they're older, they behave a certain way, and that is true today. Like, you see a distinct difference between how my kids behave, even though I'm very proud of them. And I think they're pretty money aware, but they still don't think like I think. And it's just because they haven't had that past. They've had more security, a bigger net underneath them, where we paid for a lot more stuff, which I guess that could be a video too, the things we paid for when they were kids. But it never left. It doesn't leave to this day. So when I got my first job and I was living on my own, it wasn't a big deal because it was just me. So I was saving money. Then what happened was I got married to my wife, Beth, who is the youngest of four, and by no means spoiled or anything like that. But as a matter of fact, she's pretty cost aware, and she doesn't spend much money. But she still had a different outlook than me. Like, one of the examples was when I think we were just shortly married, and her car was so bad, so we had to get her a new car, which was obviously a used car. But so we were driving to a retreat or something, and we were taking my car because my car was decent. And I said, "Oh, we got to get another car. Your car is trash." We couldn't even sell it because when I had a mechanic look at it, he said the steering column was about to break. So I couldn't in good conscience sell it to him. So we went to scrapyard and sold it for whatever, $500. Well, probably 200-300 bucks back then. So we're driving up to this retreat and we're having this discussion about a car. And so she's like, "Oh, I'd like a new car." Meanwhile, knowing that we kind of knew that she was going to stay home. I don't know if we were in the house at this point or if we were still in my apartment, but we're driving up, and so we're having this car conversation, and she's like, "Well, I want to get a new car." So I'm like, the agony of my mind is happening. Like, well, we really can't afford a new car. It may have even been pre-wedding. I don't think so, though. I think this was after the wedding. And and so the conversation then went to, well, if I'm not going to get a new car, then let's get a BMW. And right there, I was just like, oh my gosh, we were just coming at things from different angles. So the lesson behind that is, I'm an inordinate, I'm just a weird saver. Like, it almost hurts my brain to spend money on certain things. There was a whole study done on that where they took people who saved a lot and they hooked up they hooked those diodes and stuff up to their head, and they watched the patterns. And it was like spending for people was almost as painful as something that was really painful. So that was kind of my brain, and her brain, like she's not a crazy spender, but she just doesn't have that. Doesn't it doesn't bother her as much. It drives her nuts. The little things drive her nuts. The big things drive me nuts. The little things drive her nuts. So what ended up happening is we ended up creating a budget more as a communication tool than anything, because I didn't want to get in fights over it. So, and to this day, it works for us. Even in this big thing that you'll see in the retirement cycle was I had to make sure the budget was there to free me to spend. So the budget for us did two things. One is it enabled her to spend, because and not bother me, because I knew we had categories that we would just spend. And two, it helped me to save, because I knew that things weren't going to get out of control, so we would save certain amounts. So the budget has always been a really good tool for us to kind of even manage our marriage to a certain extent. um, I mean, it was funny. I was looking at the sheets the other day in the process of doing some of these YouTube videos, and I had found where I'd actually planned out all the kids' college educations, like how much they could afford, how much food was going to be, even before they went to college. So I've been kind of always a little crazy about that. So what I want to do now is I want to walk you through like how the budgets played a part in our financial lives, because believe it or not, the budget, like, and that's why I'm over here now clicking. You'll see I'm on column C here, where we're going to start young, and a budget kind of played different roles in our lives as we went through, and then it evolved into something else towards the end. So if you look, like between 23 and 26, I got married at 25. Hey, how come that wasn't a major part in here? Oh, that's kind of a shame. Um, wow. Oh, if Beth watches this video, she's gonna be mad at me. So Beth and I got married around 25. So those first few years, like uh, when it says like at 23 and 24, no budget, that basically means I didn't spend anything. I lived in a couple different locations. I moved around. I didn't spend anything. So I would go back home when could drive home. I would fly home occasionally, but it was so my definition of no budget is almost no spending. I eat out occasionally, but it was, I saved more money. So I got married at 25. You'll see we had our car discussion. I just put that there to remind me that was what I was telling you guys about the car discussion. So we really didn't have a budget. She was working. She had just got her teaching job. I was, I had my professional job. So we were doing pretty well. We didn't have to budget too much. The car discussion was more, it just kind of introduced what we were going to have to do and start thinking. So we were in the apartment for a year. So we didn't really have a budget. And then what started the budget was we bought our first house. And that's when you kind of freak out because you have to pay property taxes and electric bills and da 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 da. So that kind of started the budget. Like we didn't have to go crazy, but we knew we kind of had to be careful because we knew we wanted a couple things. We wanted, I was willing to stay in that house forever, but it was a really small house. But she wanted to have, I think she wanted six kids. We ended up having four. But I knew that we were going to have some sort of budget to save. We had to pay off her student loans. We probably did that when we were in the no budget years, but we had to kind of prepare for that when she was going to quit her job. And so we kind of started an intro budget. It wasn't a super tight budget at that point. It was just kind of a guidance thing to make sure we had enough money in the house and stuff like that. Or, enough money to pay the mortgage, stuff like that. Probably where things really got heavy budgeting was in this span, and that primarily was because we that was when she had kids. She stopped working, so that's when we went all out. Like that was when we actually had a full. It was uh, it's like an envelope of envelopes. So it was a book, essentially a little book, and it had a bunch of envelopes in it like this, and we had an envelope for everything, dog, going out, spending, uh, like home improvements, meaning like pots and pans, stuff like that, emergencies for the house, gas, car emergencies. We had an envelope for everything. And literally, I get paid, it would get deposited. I would go to the bank every 2 weeks, get a cash withdrawal. and it was so funny because I'd be like, can I get that in 20s and fives? And I would put all the money in the right envelopes. And for several years, I mean, we probably used it for 5, 6 years. We would use the envelope system because it was just a little nerve wracking. These years were probably some of the most awesome years because the kids were little. We were having a great time. But man, from a money perspective, it was tight. I remember going down to Wildwood, and after paying for everything for Wildwood, because it was always a cash gig, we'd come home and I'd have like 200, 300 bucks in savings. And bear in mind, we were still putting away for retirement. I mean, it's kind of a retirement channel, but all this has to do with retirement. We still paid ourselves first. That was always a priority. Like we were tight those years, and I don't think we sacrificed. Probably the biggest sacrifice we made was like international vacations and stuff like that. We basically just did Wildwood for all those years. Kids loved it though; they still love it. Um, but and actually we have some really good friends that at that point in time they would make fun of us because I'll never forget in a nice way. It was cool. So I remember they were at our house. It was like a Friday night, and we hadn't eaten dinner, and this is how well they knew us. And so the spending budget was empty. It was done. It was like right at the end, I was about to get paid. And one of our friends, this is how well they knew us. It was John and Michelle. I think John was like, "Hey, Steve, you're gonna have to take from the dog envelope to buy the pizzas tonight." And that's exactly what we did. We took money out of the dog envelope because we had a little extra to pay for the pizzas. So they would give me grief for years over that. I mean, it was fun. We had a really good time. So this was really heavy duty budgeting. We watched it all. And when that envelope ran out, for the most part, we were done. And Beth was awesome at that. She was cooking. She took in she did a little job on the side babysitting. But like I said, those were some of the best years, but they with the kids, but man, they were hard years. So when our financially, so when our fourth went Ariel, when she went to school, Beth started looking. And it still for those first few years, since Beth didn't she didn't get that tenure job. I did one of the salary history things. You can look it on another YouTube channel of ours. It took her like a few years before she really started making money. So we were still heavy budgeting, like probably in these few years, but it was getting a little easier because we were used to living without our money at all. So two things happened. Well, and she couldn't get health insurance until she was tenured. So my health insurance wasn't so great, which is odd, being how it was most people I worked with were like millionaires. But so so what we did was we were light budgeting. We kind of gradually started getting lighter and lighter. Now when Beth got her New Jersey when she got tenured, essentially, that's when we kind of started just so look at if you look at the age, it was like 46. That's when, I mean, there was a lot of money moving around. And like I said, look at this. We had talked about this in one of the videos here. I paid a $9,500 worth of insurance one year for all the kids and ourselves. And that was just car insurance. But these years, like when she was teaching, these years, really we didn't budget so much. You can see we went to Italy and Switzerland. We did that vacation. We were still going down to um, Wildwood. We bought our first brand new car. That was when we bought the Highlander in 2015. So we had some money. I mean, there's a lot of money moving around between the three colleges and the car insurances and the food and just everything. Um, there was a lot of money moving around, but it was more an exercise in moving money around and not as much in terms of looking at every dollar. And so what ended up happening, and you know what's going to kind of happen, guys, when we have a discussion, I'm probably going to break this up into a couple videos. It's just going to be really two more videos. But then the last phase, which hit in 2020, when I was like 53, was kind of when we became debt free, right? Somewhere around in here, I started planning like 2019, 2020 is maybe even a little bit of 2018. I started thinking about potential retirement. So that was when we started doing extra house payments, things of that nature. So what happened was in 2020 was, and because the reason I know that is because the date on the spreadsheet is I started looking at actual, like, hey, what's the end game for this thing? When will we be able to stop working? How do I put that plan together? So now all of a sudden it kind of switched mentality. Like this was just kind of a survival budget. This became more of a, hey, how do we live with no budget? Which is kind of, by the time we were rolling around those later years, we weren't thinking too much. I mean, I was constantly thinking about how to move money and stuff. Not fancy move money like, how do I pay for this college? How do I pay for that college? How do I buy this car? Making lease payments on college cars because I got tired of cars breaking down, so I started leasing cars for the kids. Well, I leased two cars. Um, and so the third phase of this whole budget thing kind of became more of a, all before then, budgets had been almost a survival tool. Now they kind of became a, how do we have a good living tool? Like I needed to have a budget put together that was kind of based on a few things, right? One, life as it was, which was pretty good. You know, Beth was working, things were starting to come together a little easier. So we weren't budgeting as much. So I kind of wanted to create a budget, not for us to necessarily live by, but I wanted to take how are we living today and let the numbers turn into a budget. And that's not how you usually do. Like early years of budgeting, you don't do that. You don't say, hey, we're having a good time, we're spending, let's create the budget from our spending habits. You don't do that. You create, you have a target in how you want to spend and what your financial goals are. You make the budget, then you live according to the budget. When you get towards retirement, it starts flipping the other way. We're like, hey, we got a good life here. We want to make sure we don't lose that life, and we want to maintain that. So we take that way of living without a budget, and we essentially take it and turn it into a budget. But it shouldn't be a problem, right? Because you're saying, let's take our current way of life, and obviously we're going to look at the future way of life too, and turn it into a budget so that our standard of living doesn't have to change when we retire. So that's what happened. So this third blue section was all about, like, how do I create a budget to make sure that our quality of life and retirement is good. So this budget, it starts to think about things in the future. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction to that. Where is it? Here it is. So this was the first step. Just for funsies, I'll show you. This was just the first step. Like this originally was one spreadsheet. And what that spreadsheet was is I started laying out all of our expenses. And I said, hey, is it adjustable? Is it something that I can control or have a way to change? And then I had four columns, right? Three columns. What do we spend today? What would a good retirement look like, and what would like a pseudo emergency not as good retirement look like? And that's that column. And so I started filling out these columns based on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this video here and now, because I have a feeling I'm probably getting around the 2025 fence. I'm going to give you a look at this. I'm just going to overall look at this. We're not going to go through it just yet. We'll go through this on part two. This will probably end up being like a 5-part video, because eventually I automated it, not in a spreadsheet, but in software. Oh, that's the other thing too. Actually, that's a good contextual thing to talk about. So eventually, too, what happened is it's a fair amount of work to keep track of the money and keep track of budgets. So in retirement, I wanted to figure out a way, because it was kind of fun during these years, because I was dumping our bank account into a spreadsheet. I was dumping our credit card, and I used one credit card. I mean, not throughout our whole lives, but when we weren't going to go to Disney anymore, because we used to use Disney for Disney bucks, I went to Capital One. So I used that as my credit card. But I dumped that credit card for a whole year and literally look at every dollar. So instead of me dictating, it's like I said earlier, I would look at what we put on the credit card and say, that's what's going to drive the budget. But there were a lot of things in that spend that wouldn't be there in retirement. You know, kids insurance, kids college, things like that, and some other things too. Even food, how much money we spend in food. Two of my kids have living on their own, so my food budget went down. So the last and final step, well, it's never final, you'll see, but I'll show it in this set of videos, is I got tired of doing that. It's like dumping a spreadsheet every time and looking through it. And the other thing you have a budget too is inflation, right? Inflation hits that. So you don't feel like dealing with that in a spreadsheet and everything. So my last evolution, so to speak, of budgeting was using software. So now the retirement software has those accounts, and I hook the retirement software up to those accounts. It sucks it in, and then all I have to do, and it automatically tries to assign the to the right categories that I've created, and and then what I do is I'll double check it and then I assign it, and now the software will tell me, well, hey, how are you doing? Are you spending more in certain areas? Are you spending less? And that's critical, right? Because part of your success in retirement is with inflation and everything, that that what you're spending every year isn't going off track with what your plan was. So that'll be a step. So this is just, you're just seeing, this is the very first thing I did when it came to starting to think about planning for retirement. And you'll see I actually have actual numbers in there too. So what I did is I laid out all these three different retirement things. Then I have this is the monthly amount, this is the yearly amount, and then what I did is I dumped my Capital One in my bank account, which is anything. I didn't want 15 million credit cards because I really wanted to get it as centralized into one as possible, and then I matched them. So I was like, hey, so you'll see this was for 20 to October 20 to October 21 to October 21 to 22. This is the year of 2020, 2021, 2020 to 2021, 2022, 2022, 2023. And it actually looked at those numbers. This is a minus because of something funny that we did in the spreadsheet, but don't worry about it. And so you'll see, I was like, well, hey, in reality, it looks like I did okay budgeting because I'm coming in under. So the one thing I said for today was, here's my number. And you'll see consistently we were coming in under that number, except for this year. And there was a couple of reasons for that 23. And this was like a good year because there's some things in here that aren't going to be in the regular budget. So this was the very first, outside of the envelopes, most primitive way to do my budget. And like I said, this budget I didn't create in my head. The numbers in my accounts created this budget so I could start setting up for retirement. So why don't we end the video there? And what I'll do is I'll go through each one of these in the next video, and then that'll set us up for showing you how I did the automated piece. So thanks again. That's just part one of like, where do budgets fit into our lives and how.